Hi guys, Croston, the Hardy Product Manager. Welcome to the Sportfish Spring Spectacular. Today you're joining me on an absolutely beautiful Borders freestone trout river. It's early in the season. We've got a beautiful day for it, albeit a little bit too bright and sunny to be honest, but we're going to give it a go. What we're going to look at today is we're going to fish two methods from one rod setup. We're going to look at a little bit of traditional upstream nymph fishing and also hopefully a little bit of dry fly fishing if we get some fly, and that's always the big question at this time of the year. Anyway, we're going to dive in and have a look at some of the equipment that I use for this kind of early season fishing when I'm approaching it just with a one rod setup. When I'm sort of doing a one rod approach on an early spring river, my go-to choice is a 9'9" 4-weight. This is the Ultralight LL. That rod has a little bit more length, so it allows me to control the line a little bit better when I'm doing some sort of upstream nymphing or spider wet fly techniques. But it's also still short enough to give me good recovery when I'm dry fly fishing. So it's a really good crossover rod when you want a sort of one rod fits most things scenario. I'm not really going to be doing any Euro nymphing today. There's plenty of other ways to catch fish other than Euro nymphing. That's why I'm going to go with the upstream nymph. In terms of the other gear, the reel, this is the Hardy Avalon. It's the Euro nymph model. I fish this reel a lot. I also use it for dry fly fishing with the weights taken out. It's a really good versatile reel, big, large arbor, which is something I personally like. In terms of the line, this is one of the weight forward Grace floating fly lines. What I have actually done is I've spliced a short section of fluorescent orange fly line into the tip. I've used a seamless super glue splice, which just gives me a nice colour contrast for when I'm upstream nymph fishing. On the end of that, I've got a tippet ring that again's welded into the end of the fly line. And then from the end of that, I have a very, very short butt section of about 2.5 feet of tapered mono. It starts at about 15 pounds, drops down to a little section of 12, and then I have a small loop on the end to which I've attached my tippet material. For this kind of upstream nymph fishing, you don't want a big, long, thick tapered leader. You want a short taper running into thin tippet material. The overall leader length is probably around 10 or 11 foot. I've got two flies, one on the dropper, obviously one on the point. The tippet diameter is about 0.14, which is around about 4.5 pounds breaking strain. Fishing a little bit heavier because we're early season. Quite often we'll encounter some of the bigger fish of the year in this sort of early season window. When it comes to the dry fly fishing, what I'll do is I'll very quickly, if we get a hatch and we get some rising fish, I'll knock this tapered leader off, this tapered butt section. I'll put it onto one of my foam spools up here, and I'll attach a long tapered dry fly leader with a long level tippet on for any dry fly activity that happens. So I'm going to be able to flip between upstream nymph or spider wet fly fishing if I want to, and dry fly fishing. So that's the basic equipment. That's all you really need to tackle these early spring rivers when we're looking to target fish within a relatively short window during the day. Anyway, let's have a look at fly choice for today. So we're in that early season window, so what have we got hatching? Potentially we've got large dark olives. We may still have a few March browns, although we are sort of creeping out of the window for those now. And we also might have a few granum. It's right at the start of when the granum get active. Haven't seen too many in the last few days, but you never know, they may become a player a little bit later on. And then finally, the other thing which everybody overlooks in the spring is there's always midge available to the fish pretty much every day of the year. And quite often at this time of the year, later in the afternoon, when the olives and the March browns have all finished, you will still get some midge activity, and you can still get them fishing dry midge patterns if the conditions are good enough. In terms of fly choice, on the nymph side of things, I often see at this time of year a lot of people fishing flies which are too small. Early season bugs, particularly March browns, are a very, very big meaty mouthful of a nymph for a fish. So I typically tend to fish flies in the sort of 14 and 12 size category early on in the season. When it comes to granum, quite often you'll see a lot of anglers are fishing dry granum patterns to fish that are actually aggressively feeding on a sending pupa. When they're eating pupa, it can look like they're actually eating an adult, because quite often they intercept them subsurface or they take them very, very energetically, and when they turn down they create a boil on the surface that looks like a rise form. So if you do fish to granum feeders and you're not getting response to your adult, it could be because they're actually eating a sending pupa. So when I start to fish in here in a moment and I start upstream nymph fishing, I'm going to put a generic nymph pattern on the point, basically a pheasant tail, for any want of a better description, on about a size 14 hook, and I'm also going to fish either a granum pupa or a second nymph on the dropper, and I'm just going to fish upstream. I'm going to prospect and see what actually happens. If we're fortunate enough we get a nice hatch of fly later on, obviously I'm going to switch out and I'm going to fish the dry flies. So in terms of the fly pattern, I'm probably going to have a few patterns just sat there at my disposal in case I need them. A couple of emerger patterns, a cul-de-canard type fly. It's going to sit into the surface film with the wing protruding through. That's going to cover me for the start of the hatch. I'll have a few slightly larger adult dun patterns, again probably cul-de-canards, maybe an odd parachute or two, and I'll obviously have a few granum emergers and a few granum adults just in case. And then finally, just in case it really comes down to the wire this afternoon and we end up midge fishing, I'll have the old favourite sort of high-vis Griffiths gnat available, which I can just stick on and cover any midge feeding fish that I see. That's a great early season midge pattern. Anyway, we'll jump in the river and see if we can make something happen. So my primary method of bite detection with this upstream nymphing method is I'm going to use the end of the fly line and this colour contrast. It's an old way of doing it, but it's still one of the best. There's lots of different ways you can approach bite indication. You can use a piece of distressed, very thick bicolour mono in the end of the fly line. I do that occasionally as well. You can put what used to be called a curlicue, which is like a coil of coloured bicolour material in the middle of the leader, or you could use some form of bite indicator if you really wanted to. But I prefer the straight off the end of the fly line, high vis tip, and I'm going to be watching that for any movement. What I will do before I fish it, and really, really important, is I'm going to grease it. I'm going to take a little bit of grease from under my pack, and I'm going to grease the tip so it sits up on the water and rides nice and high. If anything happens, if it just doesn't even look like it's drifting right, I'm going to set the hook. Really good adage in nymph fishing is a strike costs nothing. Don't strike quite often. It was a chance at a fish that you've missed. So always, if you're unsure, set the hook. Always look for an excuse to set the hook with any kind of nymph fishing. So we've got a bit of grease on there. That should keep it floating nicely, and I'm going to get in and have a go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work out, I've got a lot of bedrock in front of me here. Fish typically don't like to sit over bedrock in a lot of occasions, but there is a fissure in the bottom, and out beyond that is gravel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a nice working length of line out. I'm going to extend fly line upstream into the current seam and let it drift along that outside of that fracture in the bottom, which I can see. Now with this kind of fishing, I'm prospecting. So I'm making upstream searching casts. They're quite long casts because I'm relying on drift window and length of drift to sink the fly in the water column. If I was euronymphing, I'd probably have slightly heavier flies on, and then I'm relying on the weight of the fly over a short drift window to get me to depth. But with this technique, I'm fishing at longer range, which is often a good thing when we're in very low water conditions like we've got at the minute. And I'm just prospecting. Watching the end of that line, I'm mending when I need to manipulate it. And I'm watching that tip for registering a take. All the time, watch the tip. If it does anything, set the hook. you come to a piece of water that you really like the look of, it's worth putting more than one cast into it. Early season, the fish can be a little bit lethargic, particularly at this time. We're a little bit early in the day, things haven't got going yet. The fish can be less prone to move a long way for a fly. As we get more towards lunchtime, we can expect the fish to be a little bit more aggressive and maybe come a little bit quicker. But while it's early, I'm making sure that I'm thoroughly fishing through the good water before I move upstream. I'm going to slide a couple of casts up this edge before working back out into the main current seam again. The advantage, or one of the advantages of fishing like this, because those flies are a little bit lighter than I would be if I was Euro nymphing on a tight line. I'm getting much better carry in the water column. So what that means is my flies, my nymphs are behaving a little bit more naturally than they would if I was purely relying on weight. Very, very good Euro nymphs are very good at getting the weight right to get good carry but still good depth presentation. Most people still fish too heavy when they Euro nymph. With upstream nymphing, you can basically go lighter and get really, really good presentation and good carry in the water quite easily and still have reasonable bite detection. Okay, so I'm going to fish upstream now into this quite nice looking little confluence of currents really. It's important when you're upstream nymphing, although we're using distance to give us better drift, it's important not to throw too far. If you start to cast, 30, 40, 50 feet upstream, you lose sight of the sighter. And if you can't see that indicator, you obviously can't react to a take. So we want to get a nice working length of line out that's giving us good long drift, nice natural fly behaviour, but where we can still see and manage the line, the sighter and the drift throughout the cast. And we're sort of coming up into the area where I would maybe expect to get a little bit of action. And there's one. There's a nice fish on the upstream nymph. Don't know which fly it's hit. But that was actually right towards the end of the drift. Just as the fly started to lift in the water. And I think it's actually a grayling, which although in the most of the UK at the minute are out of season, on this river system, because we're in the borders, they're actually not. So they are actually still in season. We're not targeting grayling, we're looking for trout, but it's actually quite a big one. It's not a huge fish, but we'll get him netted and we'll get him back quick. So I'm not even going to touch him. I'm just going to let him out the net. There we go. So that fish, although it was a grayling, it took basically a large dark olive nymph on the point. I've got a granum pupa on the dropper as well. I haven't seen any granum yet, so I may change that out in a minute for another nymph, but I'm just going to slot in just upstream of where I caught that fish. Same drill. There we go, there's another one. Next cast straight away. Quite often when you find one, you find more, because a good place to be, oh, and it's a trout, nice fish. A good place for one fish, it's often a good place for another one. And when I'm playing fish, any kind of fish, I always try and drop downstream of them and get behind them, taking them away from where the other fish might be. And just by magic, as I decided to sort of take that granum pupa off. It's actually eaten the granum pupa. So I think that one's going to stay where it is now. It's giving me a tussle in this quite strong water. There we go. There he is. Not a big fish, but a nice one for the upstream nymph on the granum pupa. Cool my hand down in the water, wet him, there he is, beautiful little wild brownie. Get him straight back. We're looking for a bigger one. So it's after 12 now, and I was hopeful the fly had started to get going. It hasn't actually started. There's still a chance, but this time of year a lot of it is about trying to make it happen and taking your chances when they appear. So we'll give it 10-15 minutes in here. Doesn't happen, we're going to bolt and go upstream and give it a go and try and get one on the dries. So I've dropped in behind this island. I've actually seen one fish rise. There's not really much fly, there's just an odd one coming, looks like an odd large dark olive. And really it's the same conundrum every time at this time of year. It's whether you stick or twist. So I could take the chance while that fish is up and looking and catch it, or I could wait and see whether the hatch builds and a bigger fish shows itself. Because the conditions today have not been ideal, I'm just going to take the chance and I'm going to fish to where that fish was and see if I can pull him or another one up blind that's looking for some food. Before I do that, what I'm going to do, something a lot of people miss when they're dry fly fishing, the back end of the leader I'm going to grease. So the tapered section, I'm going to drop a little bit of grease on it so that it sits up on the surface. If I don't do that, it's going to get dragged under by some of that current and it can start the flies to actually drag in the drift. The other thing it does is if a fish takes my fly and I strike, it gives me nice clean lift off and a direct contact. The tippet, I'm not going to put any grease on it at all. I don't want that floating. All I will do is maybe rub it down with a little bit of mud to take the shine off it, but I've already done that, so we're going to go straight in and have a few drifts over this fish and see if we can pull him up. So we're just going to prospect a little bit to see if we can pull a fish up before I get to where I saw the riser. Well, often what will happen at this time of year, especially when there's not that many fly, the fish will sometimes roam around a little bit. We've got a couple more drifts through, and then what I am going to do is a trick that sometimes works when there's no fly or a light hatch. I'm going to give the fish a much bigger food item to commit to. So I'm going to take my large dark olive off and I'm going to put the March Brown pattern on. There are no more March Browns at the minute. There have been in recent weeks, but there's none at the minute. But I'm going to give them a much bigger profile fly. Because at this time of the year, sometimes giving them something worth eating is enough to trigger them to come up. Just seen a little boil there actually, that might have been him taking some at subsurface. Put that March Brown emerger on that we looked at earlier. Going to drop a little bit of floatant on the wing. I'm just going to slot this through where I think he was before. There we go, not bad. Now the leader I've got on is a Spanish style dry fly leader which lands folded, so the tippet lands above the fly so that you get a fly first presentation. There he is. That was nice. I saw him actually coming through the water for him. Not a big fish, but just shows sometimes the right thing to do is give them something different to what they're actually eating. There we go. Nice little fish. Not a big chap, but we'll take him. My top 3 tips for spring trouting on a wild freestone river like this one. The number 1 has to be put yourself in the right place at the right time. At this time of year, we have variable weather conditions. You've really got to try and put yourself in a good position when the conditions are right. And keep in mind that good period might literally only be 10 or 15 minutes when you get all of your action for the day. My second top tip is to do with fly size. In the spring, a lot of the insects that you're imitating are actually quite big in size, and a 12 or a 14 nymph is not out of the way when you're imitating larger flat stone clingers and even sometimes large dark olive nymphs. So have a representative size of fly for what you expect the fish to eat. And thirdly, my final tip is, again, at this time of year in the spring, set your expectations maybe just that little bit lower. You're not looking to catch 10, 15, 20 fish on a wild river fishing for wild fish. I think, to be honest, we've had it now for the hatch. I think that's it for the day. There's always a chance if this wind lies down flat, you might get a few midge feeders. It's always worth hanging on if you've got time available. But for us today, I think we've had a good day. We've managed to squeak one out on the dries, so I think we're going to call it a day. I hope it's been useful. I hope you've enjoyed it. Look forward to seeing you out on the river sometime.